You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. This is where investing's made simple, and we have a special guest for today's podcast. We have Jeremy Adams, who's the author of Hallowed, a warning about America's next generation. And as you know, those that follow, I care very, very much as a father about what we're leaving our kids, how the adults are building the world that they inherit, but also how we prepare them to tackle the problems that they'll have to face. You know, they have more to face than any other generation. They have a lot of advantages with technology, but they also have a lot of things to deal with the world they live in, stuff that I never had to. So I'm so grateful to have Jeremy S. Adams, the author of Hallowed, a warning about America's next generation. Jeremy, thanks for being with us and being on the podcast.
Andy, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
So your writing has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Post, Huffington Post, on C-SPAN, all the way across. A lot of accolades for your writing, including the 2014 California State Teacher of the Year. And, you have quite a resume. What could you give us just a little bit of your background and give us a little context about what brought you to write this particular book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't believe I'm saying this. This is my 24th year teaching.
Wow.
And I know we're on a podcast and you can't see me, but I feel like I look way too young to be somebody who's been teaching for 24 years. But I come from a family of teachers. Both of my parents were teachers. And so I taught long enough so that I see kind of the trajectory of change. And in the last 5 to 10 years, to be perfectly blunt with you, I have seen changes and pivots in our culture and in our country that bother me. But that's not really why I wrote the book. What the reason I wrote the book is because these changes were manifesting themselves in the children in my classroom and also the children in my own home. And, sometimes you hear your students, and I teach really bright kids. I teach the honors classes. I teach at a university. And so, a student will say something kind of odd or weird or off-putting. And I'll say, well, maybe it's just my class. And then you talk to your colleagues and they say, no, it's happening in our classes too. And then you think maybe it's just California because, we're a little different out here in California. And then you talk to your friends in other states and they say, no, it's happening here too. And so a lot of these deeply, profoundly disturbing changes that I've noticed in our young people and in their lives have taken place very recently. One of the things that you hear when people want to criticize the book or criticize me is they say, well, this is every generation, right? Every generation thinks the next one is going to hell in a handbasket. And I would say that that's actually not true. These are recent changes that I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. And if you talk to teachers who have been teaching for a while, they will tell you that these are kind of embryonic changes. They are new. They are uniquely worrisome.
Well, this will be an interesting discussion. One of the people I associate with a lot is Robert Kiyosaki, and he's brutal to teachers. His father was a teacher. My father was a teacher. I'm probably less brutal. I think there's good people and bad people in any industry. There's good and bad lawyers, good and bad teachers, on and on and on. I don't put everyone in the same basket. But tell me a little bit about, first of all, the term hollowed out. What does it mean to be hollowed out?
Well, one of the things I've been noticing is that when you think about the things that fill us in, right? Think of the things that the kind of soulful, intellectual, emotional connective tissue that makes human beings happy and joyful and meaningful. You think about things like friendship. You think about things like faith. You think about things like family. You think about things like patriotism. You think of learning. You think of charity. You think of all these things in your lives that tend to give it order and meaning and purpose. And when you actually look at the lives of our young people today, people who are in my classroom, people who have been in my classroom in the last 10 years, imagine taking all of those things out of their lives and they would literally be living hollow lives. And here's the thing, is I'm not making this up. So if you do the research, it is clear that the young people in our class, in our colleges and in our schools today are literally, this is not hyperbole, Andy, they're the most unhappy Americans in the history of our country. If you look at the rate of suicide from 10 to 25-year-olds in the last decade, it's gone up by over 50%.
Wow.
If you look at the rate of self-harm, students who are harming themselves, cutting themselves, it has gone up by over 60%. The word that we educators in the trenches hear every day, Andy, is anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. Students will tell you how unhappy they are, how anxious they are, how isolated they are, how lonely they are. And of course, you know, what's interesting is a lot of people think I wrote this book because of COVID. COVID happened, and after all of these things were already present in our children's lives. You know what I mean? And I think, and your listeners know that all of the things that have happened, all the measures of the last 18 months have amplified, accelerated, and put an exclamation point in all of these hollowed out habits and values that our students already had. So that's what I mean by hollowed out is literally they are not attached to the things that give life its meaning and its purpose.
So I don't want to be too brutal to anybody. I think, I think there's a lack of kindness in the world, that we'd solve a lot of problems if we treated each other as human beings and, not as greedy, awful, people. But I'll tell you, while some of my colleagues tend to put crosshairs on teachers, look at these teachers setting these kids for fail. My big thing is really different than that. Mine's where in the heck are the parents? I have the opportunity to do a little bit of work in schools and, as a volunteer. And so I get in there and try to get in the trenches and see what's going on. And my biggest thing I observe when I see a young man or young woman that seems to be doing well, that's happy, or one that's stressful, is I see their home life. And,
yes.
I think the idea of, I'd like your opinion on this. There's no room for abuse anywhere. Some people feel that if I abuse someone, I'm making them stronger. Well, abuse causes broken bones. On the other end of that spectrum is coddling, which is probably worse because that causes brittle bones. And both are unacceptable. And so I see a lot of both extremes, and I see very, very little in the middle sometimes. I see people who are abusing a lot of kids, and I see people who are just coddling the hell out of these kids. I see a lot of broken bones out there, and I see a lot of brittle bones out there. How do you find that good balance to where I'm not abusive? Because it seems to me that if you look at a kid, like when I grew up, bullying was when the kid beat the hell out of you, took your lunch money, and that was kind of it. Now, as a teacher, you could bully a kid by pushing them a little bit. If you see, let's say you're an English teacher and you see a kid's got potential, you want to put a little fire into that kid and you say, hey, this is not your best work. Now get going. You can do better than this. Oh, now he's damaged me emotionally. How do you even be a teacher right now?
There's a lot there to unpack and a lot that I completely agree with. I want to add on to. I mean, you asked the golden question, which is how do you find that middle ground between neglect and abuse? How do you find that middle ground between a kind of dogmatism that all is lost and a skepticism that you can never rescue these kids? How do you find that middle ground, Andy? And that really is the question. And you started that question by saying, you always ask the question, where are the parents? And I want to kind of start there because I want your listeners, the thing that I think would shock them the most, that we teachers don't have a lot of, perks. We're not famous, we're not rich, we don't win a lot of accolades. But I will tell you, there is one thing that we get that nobody else gets, and that is we get a front row seat to trends before I think everybody else sees them, right? So we start to see them in their kind of origin state. And what I want your listeners to understand, and what continues to shock me, is the extent to which we have a generation of young people who spend their lives completely untethered, and I mean completely, to adult values, adult role models, adult expectations. I talked about how this generation is uniquely worrisome. Well, I already talked about their uniquely bad mental health. What about the fact that they are uniquely untethered to adults because they are completely tethered to their devices? Our young people spend up to 9 or 10 hours a day
in screen time.
That's screen time before the pandemic. And what are they looking at on those screens? And I guarantee they're not absorbing values and behaviors and an ethic that's going to empower and impassion them to be self-reliant, kind, hardworking, moral people. That's not the value system that they're absorbing. In the book, I detail about how, kind of vice principals and deans across the country, Andy, are shocked when they take away the phones of somebody who did something wrong, and they confiscate it, and they look at the phones, and they're like, these are 13 or 14-year-olds, and the violence, the pornography, the vulgarity that they're absorbing, that's what our young people are doing. Is that, I know you said, there are some people who get so mad at the teachers, and I understand there are bad teachers, and there are lazy.
For sure.
But I'll tell you right now, but I'll tell you, here's an economics term, inputs matter. Not, you can't tell a teacher that they're responsible for the output when the inputs are what they are. So, for instance, from the age of 5 to 18, 91% of the time that a young person spends in their life is not in a classroom. It's not at school. It's only 9%.
Exactly.
And yet somehow that, and yet somehow that 9% is responsible for these glorious outcomes. You put your finger on it. It is about family, community, and what goes in before they come into the classroom. The second point I wanted to make, because you asked this, you asked about modern bullying. I don't want to get emotional on your podcast, because it doesn't strike me as the kind of podcast where people cry a lot. But my father just passed away 3 weeks ago.
Sorry to hear that.
And I appreciate that. And my father was one of the best teachers of his generation. He was a local celebrity. I live in Bakersfield, California. Andy, when we went out to dinner, we went to the movies, went to the mall, parents and former students, they would come up to him and talk about, thank you, and I had you here and there and back in the day. And it's interesting, when he died, Andy, I got all these emails and letters and notes, and they all describe a teacher who could not exist today. This idea of bullying, my dad, he would not let you sit there and be lazy. He would not let you sit there and be ignorant. He would challenge you. He would embody the Socratic spirit. But you're right. My dad wouldn't last today because parents would complain. You're making my child uncomfortable by questioning them, by asking them why they didn't do their homework. And so that is an absolutely hollowed out view of education, in my opinion.
It's interesting you mentioned that 9% of the time, or whatever the statistic was. As a parent, I see my number one role in my life as husband and parent. If I fail in those two, it bothers me. And that's just my opinion. I'm not dogmatic, because it's a choice to have kids, whether you want to have them or not. It's a choice to be married, whether you want to be and stay married or not. Everyone has their own freedoms on that I honor. I'm just speaking personally in the lowest form of knowledge, which is opinion, is that, my goals is that's where I want to have a badge of success. So I see when I send my kids off to school as that's what would be supplementary. So for example, when I have a meal, I have carbs, I have fats, I have proteins, and I get a lot of nourish from that. I take a daily supplement that's like one pill. It's a 1-a-day men's pill, one supplement. That's what I see school as for my kids. I don't tend to think that it's their responsibility to shape. If I've had most of the teachers my kids have had, I've been very grateful to. They've done a good job. One or two have just been horrible. I mean, one guy finally quit because he realized he just didn't belong in that school. But I don't see that as their responsibility to teach my kids how to be an entrepreneur, or to teach my kids capitalism, or to teach my kids patriotism. Look, my kid needs to know how to read. That's an important skill. Please teach him. My kid needs to know how to balance and do a little math if he's going to be an investor. You're going to be better at that than I am. But as far as creativity, spirit, patriotism, toughness, teamwork, all those intangibles that you call, being removed to where they're hollow, that's dad and mom, isn't it?
Absolutely. I would kind of maybe phrase it just a little differently, even though I think what you're saying is the absolute gospel. I think, I'm a middle-aged dude. All my students and my children say that I have dad dance moves and dad jokes and dad everything. So I guess that's kind of where I am in my life. But, when you have a passing of a parent, you do think about, what's the second half of my life going to look like? And I I agree with you. I mean, when I'm sitting there someday and I'm on my rocker and I'm pretty much at the end of my life, it doesn't matter how many copies of Hallowed Out I sell. It doesn't matter, where I get published or how many accolades or how much money's in the bank. If in that moment, in 40 years, if I can't say I wasn't a good father, and if I can't say that I was a good husband, then I'm not quite sure if I will feel like my life is a success. And I think that, the problem is that a lot of young people, when you ask them how do you imagine your life going? So many of them, they don't particularly see themselves as wanting to be husbands or wives. They don't want to be, mothers or fathers. They want jobs that pay well, but where you don't have to work very hard.
Yeah.
And I've noticed, that there's this weird materialism, and there's also this weird ethic. This will bother you. It bothers me. When I was growing up, I would see a really nice car drive by, or I would walk by a really nice house, and I would think, my gosh, I hope that I work hard enough and I do the right things and I make the good decisions in my life so I can enjoy the fruits of my success, because I'm willing to work, I'm willing to dream, I'm willing to reach. This is an aspirational country.
And risk.
I think we should all, yeah, exactly. We should have that idea of incentives. And what I see in my young people, and I write about this in Hallowed Out, is they want all the trappings of success, right? They want all the external rewards without the internal strife of sacrifice, and that's an ethic, that's a value system that they're getting from somewhere. I keep telling my students all the time, look, guys, success, like any form of success, even a morsel, even a modicum of it, even a crumb, requires so much sacrifice. And yet in education today, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but it's true, especially in the pandemic, we are constantly encouraged, make things easy, accept the late work, make them feel good about themselves, make sure their social emotional, being is number one. And I'm sorry, my dad was a great teacher because he was tough, and students remember him for that. Nobody ever came back to us, a teacher 30 years later and says, hey, you know what? Thanks for letting me slide. Thanks for being easy on me. Thanks for not having high expectations.
Let's eliminate school for a minute, and let's go back to human beings before we had school. And what was life like? Well, mom and dad taught you how to fish, which is work and skill. They taught you how to hunt, which is work and skill, and defend yourself with the sword. They taught you how to farm. And, the ultimate investment experience is the farm, is you put something in to get something out that pays you exponentially, right? It pays you in compounding, and then you reinvest the next year and compound and compound and compound. And so that seems to be very much lost. I got rid of CNN, MSNBC, and Fox off my channel guide a few years ago. I just didn't want that hatred in my home. I didn't want the vitriol around my children. I didn't want the lack of epistemological pursuits to be replaced by rhetorical pursuits, because now, news is presented as an agenda, as a proof of why some people are good and bad. There's not really a search for a truth anymore. It's really a rhetoric, which is, rhetoric will embrace truth when it is in line with its agenda, but it will sink it to the bottom of the ocean, the heaviest chains, when it's not in line with its agenda. So our inability, that idea of veritas, right? Truth, veritas, is gone. How do politics work into education right now? What's your opinion on the political? What do you teach your kids? Each political side of the right and the left would have certain things taught, and I don't have faith in either side myself.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I am kind of alienated right now. I'm not a fan of kind of either parties, and I know people love to say that. Well, I don't like either parties. Well, I used to be a pretty ardent Republican back in the day. But I love your philosophical phrasing of it. You're talking about the kind of how the epistemological pursuit of truth has been abandoned. And I would also say, since we're talking philosophy, the axiological pursuit of morality and living the right kind of life has also been lost as well. The problem is that this country was founded, and I don't want to give my Politics 101 lecture here, but this idea that in a free society, when you have the free exchange of ideas, that eventually with animated, robust, rowdy, even caustic conversation, truth will rise and progress will materialize. But the problem is that we have stopped being a country, and I see this, you asked, what do I teach? We have stopped seeing nuance as a good thing. We have stopped seeing complexity as a good thing. We have stopped seeing charity as a good thing. Thomas Jefferson has this great quote where he says, every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. And, the thing that worries me is that young people now believe, not only do you not, we used to say that you don't have you have a right to your opinion, but you don't have a right to your own facts. A lot of young people today believe that they have a right to be right. That everybody is right in their own kind of morally relative universe.
That's nuts.
And so politically, we live in this kind of myopic, nihilistic age where facts don't matter, truth doesn't exist. The only thing that gives you virtue is clinging to a certain a team, a certain tribe. And I would tell you, and this is what I write in the book, our politics has become toxic because of the hollowing out effect. So think about it, right? In ages past, you were a member of a clan, a family, right? You were a member of a church or a faith. You were American, and so you believed in the principles of the country, and you knew that you had a role towards renewing those principles and passing them on. You had friendships that you made in your youth that lasted for a lifetime. Well, what's happened is, and I see this in my students, man, it's infuriating. They don't have strong families. They don't believe in faith. They are lonely, and they're on their phones all day, so they don't have great friends. And so what has replaced all of these things that fill the soul? Politics. Politics. And so now politics is the source of their meaning and their purpose in life. So that if you disagree with them, Andy, what happens is you don't just disagree with them, you are against them, and you are their enemy. And it is toxifying. And that's why there's an intimate connection between the hollowing out of young people and having toxic politics. Does that answer the question at all?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know if that was clear.
No, I think so. So there certainly is. I'll go back to what you said before. You look at all the 60s children. Tom Brokaw called their parents the greatest generation. Perhaps the baby boomers or less than that. And then you go down the line and it seems like every generation thinks the younger ones, we don't like their music and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, I do see challenges for my sons that are different than I had. I don't get to sit here as a sage as if I have all this experience and know the best route for them. There's a humility that comes when you say, son, I don't know how you're going to work this out because I never had to face this stuff. I can't empathize with you because I haven't walked in your shoes, son. And so many of us old, farts sit here and think we know everything and we have all this advice to give. All right. Well, so what advice do we have to give? How do we help parents and how do we help teachers improve? Should we just, fire all the teachers and, send them all, into the unemployment line and get rid of them all? Or, tell all the parents you guys suck and have the state take care of things? How do you fix this?
Yeah, great question. And let me be very clear. The book is not a criticism of the young people. It's an explanation of their values and their troubles and how they spend their time. But if there's some criticism, it's towards you and me. It's towards the adults in the society that have allowed them to happen. Children aren't in control of the world that they're inheriting. They don't have any power over the world that they've been born into. So, when you're looking for solutions, they really do involve the adults. They all involve the adults. So the number one thing I would say is that the adults have got to start adulting again. And,
the adults act like children. If you watch Fox or you watch CNN or you watch these people bicker, they fight like ninth grade kids.
Absolutely. There's no adults anymore in positions of power.
There's no love either.
And forgiveness and charity. So we have got to put ourselves back into the spaces of our children again. I mean, one of the things I write about in the book is that, you see this in a million different ways, but one of them is the death of the family meal. I mean, you're sitting there talking about the balanced meals you make, and I'm feeling like a bad father because I make the meals at my house too most of the time, and they're not as good as what you're describing. But you see this huge decline in young people ever having a meal with their family. I used the term the family meal a few years ago, and most of the kids had no idea what I was talking about. And I would say, well, then how do you eat your food together? And they said, well, I go into the kitchen and I get my food, and then I go to my room. And I said, well, what do your parents do? Well, they go in front of the TV or they go to their room. And so we adults, we have got to explain what it means to be mature. We have to explain the benefit of the value system that bestowed this extraordinary country to our young people. So the second thing I would say is that we have to stop giving our young people the keys to the car before they get the license. Young people want freedom, but they don't have the wisdom and the virtue to know how to use their freedom well. Right?
Well,
so if you give a young person, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me comment on that. I interviewed a wonderful neuroscientist named Tali Sherritt, and she's one of my heroes. She's one of the most. She doesn't know this. I mean, I've interviewed her, and she, knows I've spoken to her, but she doesn't know the impact she had on me as a father when it comes to this idea of freedom. When people feel their freedom's being removed, particularly children, that's when they resist. But when they feel their freedom is being increased, that's where they embrace the experience of influence and find it rewarding. And I don't have all the answers as a father, but I'll tell you what I've found is if you take the time as a parent or a teacher to find out what the kid wants genuinely, not what you want for him, not that you want him to play the piano or you want him to make the basketball team or you want him to give you a 4.0 student or you want him to be an entrepreneur. When you get rid of all the stuff you want as a dad and say, hey, son, what do you want? And you take the time to let them discover and get clear on what they want, they'll start making choices that would surprise most adults. But we're so determined as adults on how kids should be. Every kid should be an entrepreneur. No, every kid should be a doctor. No, every kid should learn this. We're so not listening to the child that they never really get a chance often to express what it is they want. Do they want to really play the piano, or is that dad's idea? Do they really want a 4.0, or is that the school counselor's idea? What do they really want? And I think we just have a horrible inability to listen, find out what they want, and then help them construct their pathway to get there. That's my opinion.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. As a teacher, I see this. I think one of the themes of our podcast today seems to be charting the middle ground. How do we chart the virtuous middle ground for our young people? And you've talked about it in a few different contexts today, but I think you've talked about it again right now. What I see in the classroom are two extremes. On one extreme, and this is the one that I think is frankly a little bit more tragic, is simply the loss of parents in the lives of their young people. When I first started teaching 24 years ago, on parent night, you would have hundreds of parents show up. Nowadays, on a parent night, maybe you'll have a dozen in the entire evening. You look at a lot of young people who come from a background that literally does not engage them. The stories I hear, Andy, would make your skin crawl. I remember I had one of my better students a few years ago, all of a sudden was gone for a few days. And I said to him, where were you? And he said, you know what? My mom's new boyfriend, I felt like if I left the house, he would assault my mom and my little sister. So I had to stay at home for a few days to protect them. Parents who work 3 jobs. I mean, so on one extreme, you have young people who are just simply not exposed to adults. And we've put screens in front of them to fill the gap. And we know how that's going. But you describe the other extreme, which I also see, which is parents who make the decisions for their children. Yeah. And what I see there oftentimes is that is a perfect recipe for rebellion, where a young person says, I have to live a life, and it needs to be my own. And in a way, I'd support that rebellion. I really would. If your dad is hardcore and you want to live your own life, you got to break away. You really do. So it's a tough deal. It is. I remember, I don't know about you, I disappointed the heck out of my dad. My dad was a high school teacher. I still do every day. Well, I'm sure that's not true. But I remember calling my dad. I was a senior in college, and I read this book that changed my life. It was a short little story, a little novella by Tolstoy. And it's called The Death of Ivan Elias. Everybody listening to the podcast, yes, go get Hallowed out. But after that, go get The Death of Ivan Elias. It rocked my world because it was all about a guy who kind of just accepted the mainstream wisdom of his time about money and success and power, and this is the path of how a great man would live. And he realizes the whole thing was a lie. And so, I read this book and I had this revelation that I love learning. I love ideas. I love America. I love economics and finance. And I want to teach this to young people. I want to essentially renew the magic and the splendor of education for the next generation of young people. And I want to be a part of that, even if I'm not famous or rich someday. And I remember calling my dad and telling him, Dad, I want to do what you do. Andy, the silence on the other end, I might as well have said, Dad, I'm a serial murderer. And it would have been the same silence, because he wanted me, he came from poverty and he saw the progress in his life, and he wanted me to stand on his shoulders and become great in a way that he wanted me to be great. But that's not what I wanted. So I couldn't agree with you more.
You mentioned two things, reading together and eating together, as two steps that adults and children can take to make this a little better, a little less screen time, a little less. I mean, I like I said, I've turned off CNN, Fox, and MSNBC. I won't even have that garbage in my home. I don't have a systemic solution. And that, I have friends that want to fight a systemic battle. I'm fighting an individual battle. I think the way to do this is one family at a freaking time. But I'll throw something out here. Go out and get Hallowed out, learn about, what some guys on the front lines are seeing, and get more in tune for this, because you can have great investments and great business, but part of investing is getting a legacy to leave, and having your posterity, whoever you're going to leave your stuff to, as a way to manage to think dynastically, right? To create that dynasty of not just money, but truth and value for education and a different context. I'll share one thing, a habit, if I could, in this forum, in addition to Hallowed Out, a warning about America's next generation. There's a practice I'll tempt people to try. In my home, we have something we call a family night or a family home evening. And my dad did it in a really weird, well, not in a really weird way. He did it in a real traditional way. I do it in a weird way. What my dad would do for us is he'd, haul us, he'd announce, call us into the family room, and, he'd give us a lesson, usually a religious one or something like that. And, he'd say, this is how the world is, and this is how you ought to behave, and this is how it ought to be. And I think there was a lot of benefit to that. And I think that developed a lot of the ethics and the morality that I feel. But when I became a father, I did it entirely different, even when they were little children, is I would say, would you guys like to have a family night? I wouldn't command it. I'd say, would you like to spend some time as a family? And guess what they'd say? Yeah, I actually would, Dad. They liked it. And I'd say, does someone have a song they'd like to sing? Who would like to conduct? Who would like to be in charge tonight? And my little son, Zach, would say, I'll be in charge. I says, all right, what song would you like to sing? He'd say, let's sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and we'd sing together. Or we'd sing that my other son would choose the Utah Fight song, or When You're Happy and You Know It, whatever song they chose. And then I'd say, do you have something you could teach Mom and Dad? And they kind of would come up with these amazing lessons of what they learned at 5 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, now 15 years old. And I let them teach me about sharing and love and unselfishness. And I just ask questions, teach me about this. And I think parents would be blown away at how we de-geniusize our children with our own dogmas if we just let them speak, because they're brilliant. And I'd say, are there any standards you think would be good for our home? Any codes of honor that we'd like to have? And if you let your kids build it, then they'll own it, and it was theirs. And we have family night twice a week. And the reason we have it twice a week is they want to have it twice a week. And it's their standard, not mine. So we've done that throughout our kids' lives. And that eating together is an idea I'm way in love with, because that's something we do in my house, particularly eating at home. We have one restaurant we go to about once a month, and otherwise we gather around the dinner table and eat at home. And the discussions and the love and the interest is fabulous. So go to Amazon.com, get Hallowed Out, a warning about America's next generation, and start thinking about what you can do as an individual. You probably can't do much systemically. If you're a Democrat or Republican, you're going to fight with those guys and have more hatred and shed more blood. But if you just internalize and say, what can I do with my own family and the teachers that are 7, 8 in my high school and help us get better instead of condemning everybody? I think that's a start. So any final thoughts, Jeremy, as we close? You've been so gracious with your time. Any thoughts that you've learned from having, criticism come at you from the book? Anything you've learned from this experience?
Well, first of all, that was beautiful. I'm rather moved by what you just said, and I'm a little jealous because I have a teenage daughter who, whenever I ask her to do something together, she doesn't particularly want to, which I hear is normal when you have teenagers. But Andy, that was beautiful. I would just simply say to the listeners, and it's odd, I'm a normal everyday person. I'm a high school teacher, and it's weird when you write this big national book and you go on these shows like this one, and you go on TV and you have, the New York Post review your book. People are really mean. I've learned the meaning of the word troll. People are very unkind sometimes. And I was warned. If you're lucky enough to have a huge publisher, publish your book and publicize it the way they did, you're gonna have to get some thick skin. And I have learned that. But that's actually a very small sliver of the reaction I've gotten. The reaction I've gotten has reinforced this belief that I think older Americans know deep down that there is something wrong. They know that there's something broken and decaying in the soul of this country, and it's embodied in the behavior and the values of our young people. But it's kind of like they know the contours, but they need some help coloring it in. And that's what the book does. And I just want to end by saying our children need us. They desperately need us. And even if they don't tell you, an 18-year-old needs you just as much as a 5-year-old does, but an 18-year-old won't tell you. They need us. And if you're really honest, if you ask them really hard questions, they will tell you the truth. I'll end with a story. Every year at the end of the year, I will ask my graduating seniors, imagine if you could go back to the first week of high school and give yourself some advice. What would you say? And I'll never forget this student saying, he raised his hand. He was a valedictorian of the class, by the way, so everybody kind of respected him. And he said, if I could go back in time, I would take my phone and I would take it to a cliff and I would throw it as far as I can, because I think about all the valuable things that I didn't do with my time because of that phone. And you know what the reaction was? All the young people looked at him and shook their heads. They know that they need help, and we need to be in a place to help them.
Well, that's beautiful stuff. I invite everyone to use an opportunity to read about it. You don't have to agree with Jeremy. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with anybody, but at least you can become informed. And, we tend to want to read things that we agree with. And if someone doesn't agree with me, they're an idiot, right? But the truth of the matter is we've got, to learn how to listen to other people's opinions and not get inflamed and get crazy. I don't have time to be a victim. I don't have time to blame people. I don't have time to condemn people. I got 2 sons I'm going to raise, and I'm going to try to speak with an example, hopefully louder than what I can say on a podcast. And that's the way I'm going to go about it. But it's such an important discussion to have. I'm grateful for Jeremy for coming on to shine the light on this part of our job as adults, in addition to just making money as an investor. None of it really matters if we don't have a world to enjoy together as people. So awesome stuff. The book is Hallowed, a warning about America's next generation. You get it on Amazon.com. Do you have a Twitter handle you want to throw out there?
Sure. I'd love it if people would follow me at Jeremy Adams 6, JeremyAdams 6. And I don't do a lot of junky tweets. I just pretty much post any articles I write or anything exciting about the book. So I'd love to have people follow along. So thank you so much.
First, I thank our listeners for tuning in. I hope this was food for thought. And I hope whether you agreed or disagreed with what was said, that it gives you an opportunity to think about, well, what is your plan? What do you want to do to help your world and help the children that are in your life, whether it be your own kids or nieces, nephews, whoever it might be. You've been listening to Cash Flow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.